Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello. So today we are talking about Reservation Dogs. It's a little different. It's only, I think, the third TV show we've really talked about on our podcast. And so we thought it would be a good show to talk about because it is National Indigenous Month here in North America. I'm not sure where it is everywhere else in the world. And also, this is the show that just ended its second season. It's on Hulu, but also on FX. And it is a show that's getting a lot of critical acclaim. It won a Peabody Award, Spirit Awards, Critics' Choice Awards, Golden Globes, American Film Institute called it one of the 10 best shows of 2021. And it's a show that's very beloved of me, very beloved of Hannah. We're trying to get Ben on board. It's kind of our part of our slight agenda with picking this topic. And so we are covering the first season of Reservation Dogs, which is just 8 episodes. The first series, this kind of a quick plot summary, is it follows the lives of 4 Indigenous teenagers in rural Oklahoma as they spend their days committing crime and fighting it. After the death of their friend Daniel 1 year prior to the events of the series, the gang wrestles with a desire to move to California the way Daniel dreamed of doing. But first, they need to tie up loose ends in their lives and community and make preparations to leave. And the main 4 characters we will be referencing are Elora, Willie Jack, Bear, and Cheese. And Daniel is, like I said, their friend that died the year previous. So the topic is going to be a pretty heavy episode, as basically the big topic we're going to be discussing is suicide and the impact of suicide for the people who survived the person who died. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Elora as someone who found the body of their friend Daniel, who passed via suicide. We're also going to be talking about Willie Jack and her parents and the impact of Daniel's suicide on them. And then we're also going to address generational trauma, as the show makes it clear throughout that how they deal with the death of a loved one is something that is repeated generationally to the generation above them. So, like I kind of mentioned up top, we find our 4 main characters a year from their friend Daniel committing suicide, dying by suicide. And they have a memorial for him in the first episode as they are trying to figure out a way to get out of the reservation. And something very striking from the very beginning of the show, they don't make it clear right away how Daniel died. They just keep making references to this place killed him, basically. Like, we need to get out of the reservation because it's going to kill us the same way it killed Daniel. And so we are seeing these 4 teenagers really feeling as if they're fighting for their lives by trying to get out of the res, as they put it. One thing I want to highlight first is that, according to the NAMI website, the rates of suicide in Indigenous adolescents is twice as much as in white adolescents. And they mention on the show 1 in 5 Native Americans struggle with mental health. According to NAMI and another website, it's about 18 and 19%. So I wanted to just put that out there at the top of the episode. And in treatment, we'll talk about like the National Suicide Hotline and that kind of thing. So first, we can talk about Elora, as Elora is kind of the one who has the most, I don't know if I want to say the most impact, because I don't think that's true, but she's the one who finds Daniel.
I think it might be fair to say that she is the most impacted because she's the most associated throughout the series, which of course doesn't become clear because we don't realize until we're more than 2/3 of the way through what actually happened. But you start to realize that Elora has more than one loss that she's dealing with. And that there's extra layers of complication for her, as we learn, I think early in the same episode, that we learned that Daniel committed suicide, that her mother died in a car accident while drinking that no one has ever told her a single thing about.
Yes, you're right. Elora's she's the prodigy. It's almost like both in her present day and her past are both haunted by two pretty big tragedies. The death of one of her best friends, Daniel, and then finding his body, which is supremely traumatic. And then you're right. We find out over the course of the show that she lost her mom when she was 3 to it was actually a motorcycle accident in which her and the driver were both drunk. And no one will talk to her about it. Like, absolutely. It seems like nobody will tell her anything about her mom in a way that is really upsetting, to put it, simply. And so I think for Elora, she does seem to be the one who's the most adamant and like aggressive kind of about like, we have to get the fuck out of here. Like, I'm going to California, hell or high water. And we see over the course of the show that going to California was Daniel's idea. So it almost is this thing where it's her way of kind of dealing in multiple ways, is this idea, almost this mythical idea of going to California.
And she's trying to make meaning.
Yeah.
She's trying to make meaning of her loss by completing his mission, which is a common thing that happens when people have lost someone tragically, is when they're all aware of a mission and they're all on something. They often try to make meaning by completing whatever the task that they had always talked about was, as if that will ultimately resolve their grief and guilt over what they lived through. And it won't.
Yeah, they definitely talk about California like it is this truly like mythical place that will, like you said, Ben, will like have so much meaning and give them an answer. Like, if we can get to California, Daniel's life and death will make sense, and we can't live here. Like, Elora seems just really adamant about the fact that she can't survive within her community or where she grew up.
Makes sense. Every person that she's cared about has encountered tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. So her feeling like she can't be safe there, and that there is some mythical place where she can be safe and anonymous, because ultimately what we see is she joins up with we see her hedging her bets, basically. And this girl, Jackie, who's part of a rival gang.
Yes.
She meets her without her gang in a grocery store, and Jackie starts offering her another avenue to get out when she is losing faith that Bear and her original crew can actually complete the task, and she feels like this girl might be an avenue to it. She starts hedging her bets and investing in both groups.
No, secretly. Yeah, she's the most determined. And to the fault of everything else, she genuinely feels like someone who is like, I have to choose myself. I am drowning and I have to get out of here, and I will make whatever sacrifices I need to make to get the fuck out of here.
And it feels like, I don't know what both of you will think about this, but it also kind of feels like a part of the magical thinking that is a part of being a teenager naturally. And then having with this complication of Daniel completing suicide, that makes her, because I think that she might have always been a person who wanted to leave, but that after losing Daniel, really feels like that's the only answer. Kind of what you're both already saying, that really is the answer for her in terms of the next step, or the only place that she can be, or the only way that she can deal with losing Daniel.
And the only place she can find safety from the same fate.
Yeah. I can imagine she probably feels she does feel very unsafe in their community. I mean, she says it over and over again. We are going to die if we stay here. Like, this place is going to kill us. And you're right, towards the end of the season, when it is obvious that parts of the crew are losing faith in the plan or deserting the plan, she doubles down on that. She's like, what are you doing? This place is going to kill us. You can say that she really struggles to understand how they can find worthwhileness in staying there, and that they're not feeling the same desperation she's feeling. And I think, well, I don't want to jump ahead, but I think it, obviously it'll have a lot to do with her home life too, which I think we'll touch upon in generational trauma. But like you were saying, Ben, is that she doesn't have a very enriching home life. We don't know anything about her father. Even through season 2, I don't know if we're told anything about her dad. And her mom died when she was young, and she's being raised by a grandma who is quite cold to her, is sort of how it's portrayed. And so I definitely see how there feels like there's nothing for her there. And I think there's also a pretty heavy insinuation that she was, I want to say that she was like in love with Daniel, because I don't know if that's true, but that they might have had their own sort of romantic possibilities going on there. And so also with him dying, I could imagine too that with a kid as abandoned as she is, that she's like, that's it. Like, there is no future here. I kind of saw a future maybe with Daniel and my friends, but now that's ruined. And where we used to hang out was ruined, and everything is bad.
Well, and everything that she had built in order to keep herself safe was no longer safe, and essentially built on lies. Because what she created in her head was that these group of kids were her family. Mm-hmm. And that they were the ultimate ties, and that they were just as tied to her as she was to them. Mm-hmm. And that is not true. Willie Jack in particular is the first one to declare she's not leaving.
Yeah.
After she realizes that she is still very much tied to her dad and her mom. Mm-hmm. And she is not ready to leave. She has not finished what she needs to do. And actually that conversation she has where her dad sits with her in the woods and gets vulnerable and actually tells her about the guilt that he has, the sadness he feels over the loss of Daniel and the generational losses their family has had. And also that her feelings are common. They're shared. She's not on an island with these feelings, and it makes her feel seen and it makes her feel connected. And then soon after, she declares that she's not going to leave. And Cheese has also invested in this woman who's not really his grandma, but I think your read is right, that we never do see who his actual family is, that he's just kind of there with people. And as soon as he's feeling like, nah, I've actually got a pretty good gig here, he reveals himself to be betraying the plan. And Bear is never sure of anything.
Yeah, because I'm like you. I think you also mentioned, Hannah, they're all 16-ish. I think Cheese is a little younger than them. He's at least 15, if not maybe even younger this season. They say that he's 15 in the season too, so he could be as young as 14 in this season. I think it is that thing too of, like you were saying, Hannah, just being really young and thinking you have it figured out. And I think Bear is struggling with that. I think a big theme too of this as well is like individual versus community, like we've talked about in other episodes. And Elora does not feel, I think, the community, or the community has been taken from her, what little that she felt. And so now she's like, I have to make it out. I have to focus on the individual.
And she also realizes that the attachment that others have to family that does cause this conflict that we really see heightened. Like Bear decides he's ready to leave, but it also, the director made a clear point in that last shot to show Bear is struggling with wanting to actually just sit. His mom's going to pay attention to him and have dinner with him and clear the table off and give him everything he wanted. And he's not actually ready to leave that. And that's why she leaves with Jackie. Because she realizes the ties that other people have are actually betrayals to the ties she thought she had with them. That ride or die mentality that she holds on to was not actually adhered to at the same level, because the other people have attachments she does not.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you really see that too when they go to visit Brownie and she's really trying to establish a connection with him. You know, you're like my cousin uncle. She keeps calling him Uncle Brownie, and he doesn't really know who she is at first. And so you do see her make attempts throughout the show of that connection, of wanting to be with people, and she wants to be meaningful to people. I mean, that's all you really want when you're young, especially when you're a teenager, but anytime you're a kid, but all life. And even when she's in that episode with the coach, Bill Burr, you know, she asks him, like, I want to know what my mom was like. I want to know what it was like when you were friends with my parents. You know, I want someone to to include me, to bring me into the circle and share with me and make me feel warm and loved. And I think what also is sad, and I'm curious in that when she quit sports, because that coach was like, you were so good at basketball. And then what happened? And she makes it sound like, which could be very true, that she had to quit sports to go pickpocket at the casino, which could be very true. And I wonder if that lined up with when Daniel died.
Oh, that was the subtext. Daniel died and she stopped. It was a year ago. So there was no way that it wasn't. I imagine she stopped going to school that day. Is notice when we see the day that she finds him, she's the only one not at school. Mm-hmm. So I think her connection to the belief in what school can even provide her is weak in the first place. She doesn't have any hopes that she's going to have a different life than struggling the whole time. So this ride or die mentality and grabbing hold of cars and living this kind of like gangster lifestyle that they're trying to do to commit petty crimes and put aside the risks that they could get in serious trouble makes sense to them because they don't see a future beyond that. Mm-hmm. Which is the same thing that causes gang type activity in other cities like our dear Chicago. Is a lot of the kids that live in some of these neighborhoods where gangs have set hold is that they don't ever leave the neighborhood. They don't get a chance to experience the world beyond that and see that it's bigger. So many of them have never even been downtown. Mm-hmm. And it starts to make sense why you might trade that lifestyle for one where you could pursue safety, because the only safety that you believe you'll ever get comes from doing things in the way that you've seen and latching onto what's in front of you immediately because other people have let you down or left through death.
I think one thing we also have sort of hinted on too is that, you know, she found Daniel's body and no one seems to have helped her deal with that. There seems to have been no debriefing, no checking in with her, no therapy. No one's gone to therapy as far as I can tell. It's just she found Daniel's body in a horrific fashion and she was just kind of left to deal with it.
And I think that's the part where them not talking about anything as a community, and that people who die, their whole story dies with them, and how hard that is for, as always, for the people that are present. But mostly, I think it just seems like when no one is there to answer questions and no one is willing to talk about things because they're too painful, we end up with young people who are just waiting for anyone to tell them the answer and want anyone to answer any questions. So even how it seems like they're getting answers from people that they don't spend a lot of time with and may not, but they're willing to take anything they can get because there is no information out there. And also like, and a part of the reason why Elora doesn't have any attachments is because of the trauma of her mother with her grandmother. And also these kids are also surviving in a place where it's really hard to live. And especially for young people, it's hard to get through the experience of being an Indigenous person in this country.
Mm-hmm. And I think that struggle, which we definitely see with Bear, of do I stay and take care of my community and be with my loved ones and try to help my community thrive? Or do I leave and try to make something of my life, quote unquote, in a way that feels more possible or more full of hope, kind of going out there? And you're right in that Elora, she's looking for scraps. You know, the fact that she does have such a meaningful, touching interaction with her coach that she hasn't seen in like a year, as he's giving her a driving test where they go to a shootout at a hotel, is, you know, the last person or the most random person for her to be feeling so close to and have such an intimate moment with. But you're right, he's one of the few people that talks to her about her mom, shares sweet, loving moments. And also he tells her, you know, you have your mom's smile and you have her caring heart. Oh my God, I'm going to cry. I knew I would possibly cry talking about this show, but my eyes are watering right now. And that's so meaningful to her. And if she would have been given more of that, I think more connection to her mom and the people who loved her mom, she would have more of, you were saying, Ben, more of those attachments to stay. No one has really shown her, besides her friends, that they want her around, to be quite frank. And why would she stay? And then something horrible happens to her, and that doesn't change anything either. And that must have been, I can't imagine that wasn't a mind-blowing revelation to her in some capacity of the worst thing possible happened to me again. And no one's really taking care of me. No one's taken me under their wing. I'm 16 years old.
And the only person who
was.
And the only person who did, besides the coach, was Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
You see from their interactions together, like be they romantic or not, you do see Daniel working to get her out of her shell, working to get her connected to something else, taking her, I don't know if it's off the reservation and into town to go see music and to share parts of his life with her. And it doesn't seem like she lowers that armor with anybody else. She lowered it with the coach and she lowered it him, but otherwise she's playing sort of a ringleadery type of role. Bear thinks he's the leader, but he's not. He thinks a lot of things that aren't true.
When he says he's the leader, so seriously, and they all laugh in his face.
Yeah.
But Elora's the only one who actually is operating with any sense of guidance. The other ones are just going like, yeah, this seems fun.
Mm-hmm. And also, too, like on top of the trauma of finding Daniel, I think also, too, something that doesn't get talked about enough is the trauma of being one of the last people to see someone who completes suicide. And she doesn't really talk about this herself, but the rumination that must be occurring inside of her of what I could have said differently, what I could have done differently to have prevented it from happening. I think we see that, as we'll also be talking about, like Willie Jack and her parents. I think we see that as well as like episode 7, as they kind of track Daniel's movements on his last day of his life. And the people that see him last, I think it's so hard. It's so human to feel like I really could have said something or done something different and it would have changed everything. Is it possible that Elora could have taken him down this road or stayed with him longer, or that Willie Jack's dad could have done something a little differently? Sure. And that could have made things differently. I mean, that's always possible, and we'll never know that. I tell clients sometimes, like, until they invent like the multiverse, you're never going to be able to see what could have happened if things would have gone differently. You'll never know. And to hold on to that is just punishing yourself, as well as going through such deep, deep grief.
And that is exactly what happens. Unfortunately, this is a reality of my work. It's a reality of therapist work in general, that we often encounter people who have gone through that. But working where I do, I have encountered it quite a lot the past few years. And people do ask themselves these questions, and the show did a masterful job of showing that. Seeing the uncle replay that scene in his head going, why would this kid be asking me if I wanted help and just be out wandering around? And then finding out what happened, it coming back and making sense, that little spidey sense you got, that something was wrong, that you just went like, well, this is weird, but whatever, I'm doing what I'm doing, which is normal. It happens all the time. That's what normal people go through. But the number of people I've talked to that have seen someone that has completed suicide the day before, and be like, he was normal. He was fine. He was talking about, all these normal things. I mean, something seemed a little off about him, and the actor that played Daniel had that look in his eye that these people describe, that there's just something a little bit off, but you can't quite place it, because people that are going to do it do not tell you. Yeah. Because they want to do it. And it is really scary to see those scenes replay where you see them kind of working on going down their checklist, which I think was exactly what Daniel was doing, where you see them kind of work on going through their final validations that this is exactly what I should be doing, and nothing else is going to actually make me feel better. But maybe I'll try these things anyway and go, nope, it's the same as it always is. Nobody has time for me. There's no spot for me. There's no place for me. My house isn't safe. I don't fit anywhere. I'm better off dead. And watching everyone struggle with seeing those interactions when they make sense in context is one of the hardest things about this show, and one of the hardest things about dealing with surviving a suicide of a loved one. Is every one of these things you can play back 10,000 times knowing what happened, and you could apply context to it that you did not have in the moment. And the way the brain tricks you is it tries to make you think about it as if you had known that. Could you have made a difference?
Yeah, everything has meaning that wouldn't have had in any other context. You know, with the work I used to do, working at like partial hospital programs, is I would get a lot of people that had come from the hospital. And this is kind of like their step down therapy. So they'd been in a hospital, obviously, for, attempts sometimes. And when I would work with the families, it was a lot of that, well, what should I do differently next time? And how would I have known? And I should have known. And it is a lot of what you're talking about, Ben, which is sort of trying to comfort them. What we see Willie Jack and her dad do in that hunting episode, which is just comforting them and saying, like, there's nothing you could do. I think I wrote down Willie Jack's exact quote. She tells her dad, you can't control everything, because he says, I couldn't help him in the way he needed to be helped. And I think he meant that in like the general umbrella sense. And then also on that specific night. I mean, if we want to slide into talking about Willie Jack and her parents, she's the only one who's directly related to Daniel. He's her cousin. And so there's also the familial impact of his death too, even though everyone feels that it seems like in equal parts. But she has like pictures on her wall of him. She talks to him a lot. They all talk to him to a certain extent. And like you were saying, her dad was probably the last person. My assumption is he parted ways with Elora, was like walking around the neighborhood, ran into his uncle, and then left. And I can't imagine for Willie Jack's dad how he can't be, and he is, I think, fixating on, I should have if I would have let Daniel help me with the car, help me with the seed or whatever it was, he would still be there. I would have talked to him. Maybe he would have stayed the night. I would have figured it out.
Well, and even though he does ask him if he's okay, he does give him a jacket because it's cold outside. And he says to him, are you feeling okay? And again, not saying that Daniel was maybe able to be honest in that moment, which is okay. But that's a part of also that there wasn't anything that her dad did that would have made this different. Like he asked questions. He checked in with Daniel in that moment. And kind of what Ben said is that there's some people who are planning on attempting or completing suicide, that sometimes they just aren't going to tell anyone. Because it feels like the only answer. It feels like the only way that they can. And as we've talked about on this podcast, it's a lot about not being in pain anymore, and trying really hard to figure out how to not be in pain.
Yep, I think this show did a great job of showing what has essentially been the way I've come to understand it, is that people may not be in a hurry to complete suicide, but once they've decided that that's their only way to get out of pain, that becomes something they lock into and decide that that's what I'm going to do. And I think Daniel walking around and kind of completing things, revalidating for himself, like I said before, that's really the only way. He can do these other things, but they're just going to stall and keep him in pain longer. They're not going to absolve his pain. He'll just be in the same spot going, oh, look, there's fighting going on at home again. It's not safe there. And no one can commit to taking me in. No one can rescue me from this. And one of the ways that I've been describing it to people, because unfortunately in the Chicago Police Department, we've had 6 completed suicides this year. And the collective trauma of that is profound. And being able to help people understand, like, look, if I ask you a question, you're going to be able to answer it. And that's an important part of understanding that we are all born with a part of us that can decide between a rock and a hard place. And that suicidal part is a function of our fight part, where it is decided that there is no other way out of pain. And part of the ways that I'll do that are looking at people going, if you were standing on a mountaintop, lost in the woods, and knowing that you had a rabid pack of cannibals chasing you off that mountaintop, who, if they catch you, they are going to tear you apart and eat you alive, or you're going to jump off that cliff, which one are you going to choose? Mm-hmm. And the fact that all of you just had an answer to that question proves the point that you're born with it. Mm-hmm. It's a function we come with, where we have, it is within the expected range of human experiences to encounter a situation where the best option for having a painless death or getting out of pain is to take your own life. Mm-hmm. And it's scary and it's tragic, but if you think about it, it's a hard truth. Mm-hmm. And understanding it that way can help you find empathy and also help people out of that darkness if they're able to, that is not the only way to get out of pain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Life goes far beyond this, but you, in order to help someone out of a suicidal time in their life, you have to be able to convince them that they will not just be prolonging their pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, there are those moments like when they're walking back and you can clearly hear very big time fighting happening at Daniel's house. Mm-hmm. And you can see the whole group, which is very sweet of them, especially at their age, very quickly assess the scenario and then try to give him options to not be at home. Like, they're all very aware of the situation. Mm-hmm. And in season 2, you see that his parents have now split up and his mom's actually in prison. And there's an episode where Willie Jack visits Daniel's mom. I cried a ton. No surprise. And I think, and we also see in these flashbacks, which they do leave pretty gray in the show, about if there was even something contributing to Daniel's mental health as well. He seemed to have these moments when he seemed really impulsive or not erratic, but kind of like edgy, or like the hunting flashback when he's like screaming in the woods and then when they go to that honky tonk, as they call it, which could be what it's called, and he's like being really uncomfortable, like he's like dancing in loops and pushing against like the band and stuff, and that could have just be because he's like, I'm gonna leave the earth tonight, so might as well would do whatever I want. But I think they do kind of demonstrate over the show. More of the sense I get from the show is that he had these moments of really acting out, or acting maybe even like odd or intensely. And so it also makes me curious if there's like an additional mental health component on top of just having a really hard home life and living in a community with lower SES where there's a lot of hopelessness and also like a higher suicide rate. And when there's higher suicidality, it becomes more of a path to go down. You know, it's like if you know people who have committed suicide, you're more like, when we do assessments for suicidality in clients, if you know someone or love someone or have someone in your family who has attempted or completed, that is a factor we have to keep in mind in terms of upping your risk.
Because it makes it seem more available.
Yeah.
If he did it, fuck it, I can do it too.
Yeah. And so I think we see all those components to Daniel. And I do think it's interesting that the show does not provide any clear answer to Daniel in the sense of like, oh, he had bipolar, oh, he was this, or oh, that. It is truly, he does feel like a ghost that's kind of haunting our main characters, and we find out what he was like in these bits and pieces. And clearly he was very beloved, so there was a lot about him that was lovely, and that they, like him wanting to go to California, they seem to have really, not just in making meaning, but that Daniel knew what he was talking about. And it makes me curious if maybe Daniel was the leader of their little group before he died.
He was at least the beating heart.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was the leader, but he also looked like he was older. Mm-hmm. So he very well may have been, if not the leader, at least the beating heart. And I think that is an accurate way to depict how a lot of people who survive suicide feel, is that this person now feels exactly like that. Like I only remember in bits and pieces, and I always wonder what happened or what they would be thinking or how they would be feeling or what would be different if they were here. It does become like a ghost that haunts people.
Mm-hmm.
And people convince themselves when they're nearing the point of doing it that both they and the world will be better off without them here.
Mm.
And it's never true.
Mm-hmm. I think going back to Willie Jack's dad specifically, he is one of the few where they actually talk about mental health pretty specifically. And it's clear that in the years since Daniel died, his OCD has been flaring up. He's lost interest in the things that he typically would care about. He was a big hunter, and Willie Jack has to sort of pull him out of bed to get him to go hunting. And he's carrying a lot within him. And she says that too in that speech she gives when they're in the church basement for the tornado.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, my parents haven't been the same. Like, none of us have really been the same. And I think Willie Jack, God bless her, is trying to do that work that we've been talking about of we all need to really talk about what happened and come together and hold each other. Because the hunting episode, why that's my favorite, I think, of the season is it's just the two-header. It's her and her dad hunting pretty much. And they do finally have it out where they both have a really good cry and they hold each other and they say all the things I think that they've been holding on to for like the past year. He finally says his deep, dark secret, which is I could have done more to help him. I am crying as I'm talking about this. And she kind of says like she helps heal him. And I think what's so beautiful about Willie Jack, and you see more and more as the show goes on, is her role as, I think, a healer for others and herself. And really, I think, taking on more of that role within her friend group, too, and giving that to her father and therefore feeling that healing herself. When you can help someone else and hold that together, that's so powerful. And I do feel like once she left that hunting trip, I think that for her was like, I don't need to leave anymore because I got the closure I needed from my parents, and now I want to stick around and help them feel better and give that to them. And someone's got to do it.
She changed her meaning.
Yeah.
But what felt meaningful about her mission changed from something that was mythical to something that was tangible. And people will quite often make switches like that when they realize that they can get what they need and that there is something for them to do that matters where they are. Mm-hmm. And she didn't feel the need to escape anymore. Her flight part is not on as much anymore because her attached part is back on.
Mm-hmm.
She is connecting back to her family, and then she's coming back to herself. She is able to give the part of her that's been activated to defend her from what she couldn't get closure on, give it what it needs, and that part recedes back into her personality, and she steps back into herself, which is when we see her step up and step into the community and take a leadership role, because she's able to do that because she is integrated again. She is herself. She is her core self standing up in that moment, not feeling the need to protect herself from pain that has no answer. She found at least some answer, the answer that you can have, which is that we're all going through this. Nobody knew. There isn't something that you actually missed and you didn't do that's significantly different than we all missed. And that's a powerful moment when you're dealing with survivors of a suicide, is helping them have a space to process where they actually physically hear other people say, I saw something a little weird, but it didn't click. Because then the guilt doesn't feel like it's all on them, that they missed it, because our internal system is very egocentric. And that's even worse in teenagers. It assumes that we can influence the world in ways that we cannot. And that can be really damaging when you're struggling with some part of you knowing there was something that maybe you could have done, but that part can't accept the control leaving. The control you never had. The control you never had from the universe. And that's why existential therapy is so powerful, is because it helps you to give control back to the universe that always belonged to it anyway. You couldn't do any of the things. Even the version of you that would have known those things wasn't okay and wasn't strong enough to do it because you were a child then.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like we've mentioned, I think what helps Willie Jack be able to do that is that she does have the most secure attachment and the most secure home life. I think she's the only kid we see on the show that has both of her parents, not just in her life, but still married, still in the same home, still seem invested in her. And also you see ironically in the hunting episode, her dad is, I think, the only parent that's told that one of these kids is going to be leaving. Yeah. Willie Jack tells her dad, we're going to California. And he ironically gives her permission. He says, if you need to leave, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And like I said, I keep saying ironically, but I think that's what helps her stay too, is knowing that her dad's not going anywhere.
Right.
And that also him exploring with her, if you want to be something, maybe you do have to leave to be something that you want to be, like genuinely. Because like I said, there's real life factors to this.
There are.
No, it's not just like, oh, something bad happens, now you want to leave your hometown. It's like the community they live in is hard to succeed in.
Impossible, almost.
Very limited options. I think he tries to reconcile his duality, which is, I want my child to stay with me and, be with me the way that I think any parent wants their teenager to stay with them. And also recognizing for her own good, if you have to go, you have to go. And I'm sure a part of that too, I don't know how it couldn't be somewhat impacted by what happened with Daniel, in the sense of, maybe I don't want whatever happened to Daniel to happen to you. So if you have to go to be okay, I don't want to keep you here if it's going to be damaging.
Right. And sometimes giving people that permission is important because it acknowledges the truth of the situation, that if they're going to go, they're going to go. Mm-hmm. And that it is true that she can't complete her mission there if she decides her mission is something that can't be obtained there, that she has to go. And him giving her that permission quells some of that storm because it enables her to see two things are true, that I can leave. Mm-hmm. But if I alter my expectations, I can find happiness here, which is part of the point of what her dad is telling her, is like, yeah, it's sad and I wish it was different, but also I find my happiness here doing things that I can do, that I can have, which is a super existential standpoint of understanding I can only control what I control. I can't fix what my parents sold in the 30s, but I'm going to come here and hunt on it anyway.
Yeah.
And what my grandparents sold and what they were tricked into doing and how, fucked up the way Americans have treated Native Americans in the first place. And looking at the truth of the situation is sometimes that rock in the hard place decision you can make doesn't have to be escape. It can be, I'm going to make the best of this situation and I'm going to invest in it, but I'm going to give myself permission to let go of the dreams of a different life.
Well, yeah, I think a technique I use a lot with clients is like radical acceptance to do that, which is sometimes simply just I'll have them draw a circle. And then in that circle, I will say, what are your choices? What are the things you have control over? And then outside of that circle are things you do not have control over. And I use that as that practice, like you're saying, to kind of refocus. If I've made a decision that I'm not going to go to California, if you will, then I have to radically accept the consequences of that decision that are out of my control. And then what's still in my control is focusing in on what is still available to me. And that's, you're right, like what Willie Jack's dad says, which is like I think it says going on walks like 3 times. Like you can go on walks and hunting and all the simple parts of life.
And look at stuff.
And look at stuff. He's very, very sweet. I can tell he's trying to do that hard sell that parents do sometimes. And he's kind of falling flat because he's like, oh, you can eat catfish. And they're like, dude, that's all stuff we're already doing. Am I going to eat catfish? They're going to turn into catfish, those poor kids. But I know we've kind of talked about, is there anything else specifically about the people we've talked about so far? Willie Jack, Elora, Willie Jack's parents.
No, but things are going to be harder for those that don't have as firm attachments. And that's what the ACEs study has been all about, that trauma hits harder to people that have less resources. And when we even look at these characters, the variance in between the level of resources each one of them have, it's important that more care be given to people that have less in order to help them adjust as best as possible. And that needs to be a better focus in society.
Mm-hmm. So we will take a break there and then come right back. So I know one thing we wanted to hit upon as well is generational trauma. So, put in the bingo board, guys. We're talking about trauma, babe. Like we've been talking about trauma. But I think specifically in this show, it's a very clear demonstration of, very specifically, like the generation that is Bear and Elora and their parents, and the generation that is them. And the second season, it really focuses more on their parents, and specifically Elora's mom, Cookie, and her death and the impact of that. So it's this very interesting parallel in the second season to the first. But I think what we do see in the first season, and we've already kind of talked about a bit, is how nobody really talks about what happens when someone that they love dies. I think the first kind of clear demonstration of that is when Elora, they go to Brownie's house to learn how to fight. And right away, Elora's like, can you talk about my mom to me? And Brownie says, no. He literally straight up refuses to talk about her mom, even though it's been 13 years since she passed.
Mm-hmm. The way these traumas hit when you talk about underprivileged, underserved communities is that the amount of traumas stack so profoundly that people enter a protective stance and choose just to keep living, that they don't have space or time to give to being sad because it will impact their survival, and they're here now. And it can be a really pervasive problem because it keeps people from being able to process or digest anything, and then they keep being stuck in this perpetual state of survival that does not allow healing.
And I think what's so interesting about the Brownie Cookie, which is they were raised as siblings, so it's very cute that their names were Brownie and Cookie, is that he says to her, it's not that I don't want to talk to you about your mom. I can't.
Right.
And I think like what you're saying, Ben, is when you're just kind of trying to make it through and you're given very poor resources, if any at all, that you're not given any language in which to discuss these difficult things. There's no shared vocabulary around this kind of loss. And if you don't ever learn it, you don't ever learn it. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. Part of our role as therapists, if not the role as therapists, is to teach that language, to give words to what has happened to somebody. The amount of times that I feel like all I do for clients, and not in a good way, is put something in a different way for them. And they look at me with their wide eyes and they're like, oh shit, that's it. Like I never had words for it before. And now that I have words for it, I have context. And now I can put everything through that context. And it's almost like hitting a relief valve within them, where now they know what to do with the feelings and the memories and the pain that they have. I now know how to communicate that to someone else. And then when I communicate it, then I teach them and I model for them. And then so it's this very it is a very communal passing down thing to be able to share that language with someone else. And what we have seen, the generation trauma of the show, is they don't have that language. And so they really can't process it. And they can't give that to each other. This younger generation is looking towards the older generation to tell me what to do, tell me what happened, tell me how to talk about it. And they really cannot give that to them.
No, they cannot. They can't give what they don't have. And also people who aren't safe have a really hard time processing trauma. And none of them are safe. They are all struggling. There is no one we see in this show who is doing well, who has a stable, consistent pattern to life. They are all waiting for the next shoe to drop. So even taking a minute to assign language to these things wouldn't do a ton for their survival. And it's hard to see and realize that that's a reality that we create for so very many people, not just for the indigenous population, but for so many people, that they live a life that is so focused on surviving the next round of bullshit that has come their way due to poverty or other tragedy, that they don't feel like they ever get a minute to fucking breathe. And that usually contributes to high rates of substance use, which we also see in the indigenous population at a rate that is far higher than what we see in some other populations. But if your life is nothing but awful or numb out, what are you going to choose? And so many people we see in this show are smoking weed all the time and literally say something very similar to what I just said. It's like, I don't know, it's fucking terrible. Just smoke.
Yeah. I think there's definitely this energy of like, just shut up and just try to have fun. Eat your catfish, play with your friends, try to get some joy out of this life while you can. And that's it. And I think that's very true of, I'm not an indigenous person, but I am from the white communities that have a similar energy, like the more like poorer white communities where it's all very like, let's ride our ATVs and like, let's just like go out on the weekends and, party and drink. And I think it's kind of the same idea of, we're just trying to live this life while we have it. And that's that.
You see it over and over again of people reach this point where they can't get from regular levels of anxiety what they're supposed to. Anxiety is supposed to make you uncomfortable enough that you do something to change or respond to a stressor. You're supposed to feel anxious so that you do something different. You don't do things when you're comfortable. You just don't. And you seek to maintain comfortability. But then people oftentimes get stuck in this loop where it's, okay, I'm anxious, I have no control, or I have limited control, or I can't see the things I can control. So what is available to me to get away from this stressor is to deal with it and try to manage all the things that I have to do until I get frazzled. And then as soon as I get frazzled, I'm going to numb the fuck out. And then I'm going to start the whole cycle over again tomorrow. And that's my life.
And so I think where we're at with this show and specifically is I do think we see more in season 2, not to keep referencing that, but attempts to sort of break out of that and to provide more resources. And it's just hard to do. And you have to get buy-in from the community. And you do need, I think in every community, regardless of like this one we're talking about or other ones, is you also need for lack of a better term, like the elders to show you the way. Like you do need people above you that you respect who are leaders to also, like I said, create that safety, but also to model that we're going to do something different. And instead of just like head down, power through life, we're going to sit down together. And so it is like going back to Willie Jack and that speech in the church basement. I would be really interested to see like sort of the personal ramifications in a positive sense of her kind of breaking that generational cycle. A lot of people nowadays are talking about breaking generational cycles. And I think she's doing that. I also think Cheese later on, we see he kind of does that. He's just a truly resilient person. I don't know how. He's just the kind of a magical being, truly. And it is having to create this out of nowhere. And you're right, like until you feel safe, you can't really do that. It's kind of impossible because if they really, like you see in the hunting episode, if you really allow yourself to feel it, you will cry, you will break down, you will need to be held, you will need time to be a mess, kind of, especially if you're sort of the first round of people acknowledging this. And you have to have a safe spot to do that. You have to have a safe space to land and to be held and to not worry about how your bill's going to get paid. If I talk about it, will I upset one of the few people I care about? And they'll dip. Because I think that's also, you can feel the tenuousness through this whole show around these issues. And not just Daniel's death, but also Cookie's death. I think a lot you can see with Elora when she pushes in certain times to learn more about her mom. You can feel that tension of, why are you doing that? Why are you breaking the rule, which is that we don't talk about these things? capital T.
Or Bruno.
Yes.
But it's the same thing. It's the same thing as that song. And looking at how powerful generational trauma is and how it creates systems that when it's not safe to process the trauma, it keeps people perpetually trying to survive, even when they may not continually need to survive at the levels the old wisdom they're holding on to tells them to. Then remembering that, like, our parents saw the civil rights movement. We were taught about that in black and white, living in a world in color. And the perception of a lot of millennials learning about social studies is that so much of that happened so long ago, and it wasn't. It was not. It was not so long ago. That happened within your parents' and grandparents' lifetimes, and the things that you do with people that look different than you now that you don't think twice about, your grandparents would have not been caught dead doing because they would have been punished by society. That you're not being safe, or you're being, whatever race trait or whatever nonsense they may have come up with.
You're not following the rules.
You're not following the rules. And looking at a show like this, we see that when people, especially like Elora, like, it's just bursting out of her that she wants these answers. She needs to get completion on this and get closure on it, but no one will give her the answers because they can't. But can't is relative to what they believe about themselves, not what their body comes equipped with to be able to deal with.
Yeah.
But you can't see that if it's not reinforced.
Because Brownie could. I know he feels like he can't. He could, but he doesn't know if he can tolerate it.
Right.
You know? And if we were in like a therapist's office, if he could with me, I would say, like, let's see if we can. And let's just be curious about what comes up when we try, and then move through that. Like having to learn how to sit in the discomfort of breaking the rules, because I think what's so profound in terms of how deep the generational trauma is on this show is that she doesn't even know exactly how her mom died. Like, that's how secretive the circumstances around her mom's death is. Oh, that would I wouldn't be able to like deal with that, I think, at her age, of like, I don't even know what happened to her. And I live with her mom. I live with my grandma. And the only person who finally tells me is this white guy who used to be my coach, in these crazy circumstances. But I think that is just so telling on how deep the pain is. And you see as the show goes on, how her mom, Cookie, her mom's friends, that generation, which includes like Bear's mom, were close the way that Bear and Elora and Cheese and Willie Jack are, and how her death shattered them as a group. And it is such a genuine shame that Elora was already 3 at that point, that they couldn't have wrapped their arms around Elora and taken care of her. And it says so much about how much they just didn't have the ability to process it. Everyone seems like they just kind of shut down and did their own thing. Also, Bear must have been born almost, like, he must have also been 3 or around the same age. So I know there was a lot going on, period. But, it just says so much about how much their dynamic changed and how distant they are from each other. And I think what is beautiful about the group we see in this generation is, like, even in the first episode, is they do make a valiant effort to stay together as a friend group. And like, they even do that ceremony at the beginning at the end of the first episode, where they do pull in their understood language, like some of their cultural ceremonial, rites. They pull that in order to have their own version of closure. Like, they're really trying to do their best to recognize Daniel and talk about Daniel and celebrate him. And I think going to California is celebrating him. And so they are doing, now that we're talking about this thoroughly, I think it is amazing how much the current group of kids is trying to do things differently with the tools they have, which is, doing the saging ceremony and all the things that I don't quite have the understanding of, to wish him well a year out, And I would imagine, just by how you see the things with Cookie, that generation, I would have been shocked if they would have done anything similar to that a year out of Cookie's death. Is there anything else we want to talk about in terms of generational trauma before we shift into treatment?
I'm good.
Okay. We'll take another break here. I can go first just because we've kind of been touching upon what I was going to talk about for treatment. And that's just what came to mind for me is when I used to work. I used to work in a pretty like lower SES community in Ohio, where I'm from. And when there was a shared tragedy, like at the local high school, a kid died. I think at the local elementary school, a child died in a drowning incident. Like, you know, just a very shocking, unexpected death occurred. What we would do is the counselors at my partial hospital program would go to the local school and just offer their resources, just kind of be available for just general sort of grief counseling. And it was just drop in, whoever needed to talk could go into a room, a designated area, and one of the counselors that I worked with would just be available. And the point of that is to just, one, recognize that something happened. I mean, that's the first big step. Something really horrible happened. And we are going to make the assumption that it could have impacted any of us. And so we are going to have resources available to talk to for if it has impacted you in any way. So I think, one, just instilling that opportunity, just validating and recognizing that, I think goes a long way. And then, like I said, it allows, if nothing else, short-term availability of resources. And it wasn't something where we wouldn't have billed the school. Like, it was truly like a volunteer situation. And so also it's not a strain on resources when people volunteer to do that. And so it isn't one of those things where the more well-off kids or the kids with the more involved parents get access to mental health resources. It's any kid who has the courage to go to the room where the counselor sits can. And then that also allows the mental health counselors to assess people about how they're doing, if they need extra care, if they're at risk of any kind. And so that also can open the doors potentially to more support. And like I said, it doesn't require going through parents or going through insurance. Eventually, you might have to do that if the person needs to continue therapy. But I think that feels like something that was just so sorely missed in this story, is how different would it have been if after Daniel died, if there was just a counselor in their like IHS, that the health center, or at the local high school. Maybe there was, I don't know. They never mention it. But that's something treatment-wise that came to mind for me, is just having someone available after a shared tragedy to just, for as much as you need them. Like I said, it could be one and done, and it can be ongoing if they think that you need it. And also it normalizes therapy, like I said. It makes it more of a known quantity. And then if nothing else, you can give in short term, like brief counseling to help people have some resources that they can pull from to go on with. And so that's what I would do as treatment. Any therapist can do this. Like, if you can just be in contact with a local community, like you can volunteer your services in this way, to be available to do this for others. And I think that does go miles when something like this happens, when something in the community occurs.
Okay, definitely important points. Being able to create a space to have the community heal the community is important, and that be something that we remove barriers to.
Yeah.
Hannah, you want to go next? Yeah, me too.
You can go next.
Okay. This show does a really good job of pointing out the barriers that exist to low SES communities in particular, but also even more particular, like homogenous population ones, where there's a very limited range of people and there's a small space. Like a reservation would be a great example of a niche population where there is a concentrated group of people from one particular or a few ethnic groups that have particular needs that are really easy for the system to ignore, or can be really difficult to get people who want to be medical providers or providers of any kind to go out to the community, because it's so far away from everything and so isolated. And we see the impact of that when you see this piece of shit doctor,
Bobby, the comedian, Bobby Lee, I think,
out there, and he is openly telling people, like, I don't want to be here.
Well, also, I'm the eye doctor and the dentist probably, and the
butthole doctor.
Yeah, GI doctor. Like, I am the doctor, capital D.
Yeah, I mean, I think he straight said, "I'm the the eyeball doctor and the butthole doctor."
Oh yeah, because she has that stomach ache from eating flaming flamers.
Right. Which the importance of understanding how pervasive that is in our society, and it ties into an earlier point and ties into Brittany's point about why it's important to have the community heal the community and to empower and train and provide access for members of a community to become competent healers and able to provide those services to members of their own community, because then there's investment in it, and it doesn't feel like this guy's out here to get the IHS loan repayment and then he's going to dip.
Yeah.
And he's going to stay out there and just resent everything because he's not able to have the life he wants because he can't connect to people, even people he finds attractive, because they're all their colleagues or clients and he's the only doctor. And that's not healthy for him, let alone healthy for any of the people around, because he's also want to have a life, but everybody's his client or his patient. That's a problem. And when you look at what system that sets up, even the ones that we have worked in, the most chronic patients and clients get seen by the least qualified providers. And that makes no fucking sense. We all started our careers working in community mental health, working with people with chronic mental illnesses. We barely understood from grad school because grad school barely covers. I mean, it covers it. People who are working there are base level competent to do it, but the specific skills it takes to really invest and learn how to work with people that are actively hallucinating and how to help them get their needs met, and to realize that you need to adjust your expectations that they're never going to get better, but that doesn't mean they can't be okay, and that they can't get better from where they are now. And you can facilitate that. But new career clinicians often want to come out with the same egocentrism we see these teenagers have in this show, thinking that they can change the world, and seeing what little change you can have and the restrictions on it and the amount of paperwork you must do to have any impact at all, and even help these people keep access to these basic services. And how much of your time that consumes eats your soul and crushes that right out of you. And why you see so many people, early clinicians, early career, even medical folks, leave from these environments because they feel so restricted and hopeless on helping people. And it creates these systemic barriers to getting care for people that really need it. And one of the ways that I would love to see that dealt with is that even more effort is and pathways are provided to getting people education so that they can serve their own community and do it in ways that are culturally appropriate, that, like we've talked about many times, clients don't want to explain their entire culture to you. They want to have somebody that just fucking gets it.
What's so funny about you saying that is I watched an interview with the creator, Sterling Harjo, and he specifically hired all Native writers. Because he said that almost exact thing. He goes, I didn't want to try to explain Native culture to my writer's room. So he goes, I needed writers who just knew. So we weren't wasting time doing that.
Right. And why is this funny? Or why, why is calling people shit ass so funny?
Or not being able to look at it now. All those little nuances.
Right. All those little things. But the other thing that I think is important to look at is with these systemic barriers is that one of the things that I've seen be useful is to build off what you're saying, Brittany. Instead of having counselors available, is mandate it where you can. And that is something that I have seen make a tremendous difference, because the way that things are dealt with police stations that do it and populations of first responders that have the resources put in place to do this and have been under consent decrees to do so is stop this nonsense. If you have a bunch of therapists show up and just sit down, you know who's going to come talk to them? Not a lot of folks. They're going to be like, oh, nope. But if you mandate it, if you normalize it, everyone has to go. Everyone had this trauma, and everyone has to sit down in a room together and talk about it. And everyone has to process it. You get some of the magic that comes from group that's been known for a long time that is lost to insurance billing and people working multiple jobs and people just struggling, that when you get some of these niche populations, in order to break the stigma, you must normalize it. And sometimes normalizing must be done through mandate.
That's true.
That it is not something everyone can go to. It's something everyone is going to. And while you probably can't do it with the adults, they can start it in the schools.
Yeah.
And everyone is going. And we're going to break out into groups. And your classroom today is going to be a processing group. And that's it. And when you see that stuff start to happen, when it's not optional, it starts to break the stigma, because everyone starts feeling those things that we see Willie Jack and her dad go through, that we see happen with Elora and the coach, and even Elora and Jackie, where they see each other and understand that they are not connected the same. They are not the same as everybody else, and no one else gets them, because it's true. They have a connection that other people do not. And part of dealing with those kinds of things is normalization through homogenization of services. Everyone goes to the doctor. Everyone goes to this. Everyone gets a debrief. And I think I would have liked to see that have happened with these kids. And had I had any role in it, that would be exactly the system I'd implement. It's not negotiable. You're going.
Well, actually, in the next season, they have a sort of like, not group therapy, but sort of like a day where they make all the teenagers go to the community hall and like learn about their culture and like do some icebreakery kind of team building things. And they do have to bribe them with gift certificates. So it probably would look like that. Like if you go to the counselors, you have to, but also if you go, you'll get $5. I think they get a $5 Sonic card when they go. And they all go though.
Right. And they all go. And there's also cultural pressure to go, because the only way that their culture will survive is if they are given the opportunity to learn about it. And I don't see why we should do mental health any different than that we incorporate that same kind of methodology of like, we need to make this an expectation that people get mental health services they need. And then we can also work on how we pay providers and how we motivate providers, because we'll be simultaneously creating healers from within a community to heal their own community, because they'll be invested. But also we can work on solving this problem that we stop having people with the most chronic need get inadequate health care, because the people that are doing it have the least skills, because they're only going to do it for as long as they have to. And then they're going to dip. So that's where my thoughts go as far as treatment.
One thing I want to say in reference to what you brought up, and then I'll throw it to Hannah, is that there is a way, and I'm going to find it and put it in our description for this episode, to sponsor BIPOC counselors or like people who are trying to become counselors. You can sponsor them so that will somewhat cover training and continuing training and that kind of thing. So I used to have the information for that, and I don't have it accessible to me right now, but I will find it. And I will put that, like I said, in our description. But with that, I will throw it to you, Hannah.
There are a couple of different things that I thought about in terms of what I would talk about in treatment. And one of them just kind of came to me while we were discussing everything, is that I've worked with clients who are chronically suicidal, which is kind of what we've all talked about, but also have worked with clients who have lost someone to complete a suicide. And that the grief that happens when someone experiences that can I feel like sometimes be harder. I don't want to say harder than something else, but in terms of all the different things that we've talked about today, about the complicated, I feel like it often results in complicated grief. When someone's completed suicide. And that the difference with complicated grief is that it kind of means that it's connected in more than one way to different parts of your life. Also is connected to general loss that you've experienced in your life, whether or not it's been able to be processed or not. And a part of what we've been talking about this whole episode is that there's generational trauma all over the place. And so a part of that is that losing so many different things, losing so many different people can have a big impact about how you deal with grief in general. And that a part of what I do when I work with people who either are chronically suicidal or who have survived someone's suicide is we talk a lot about, which is not a surprise, making meaning with them. And I focus on a lot is allowing them to be sad, is really giving them the space, because I think there's that part of us that wants to know what we could have done better and how we could have changed it, which is something we've been talking about the whole episode, is that when our mind goes there, it can be really hard to allow ourselves to express the true sadness that we feel of losing this person. And helping them, and a part of what I do is talking about doing different kinds of rituals, kind of what we see the group do when they have their own memorial service for Daniel, in order to help them release thoughts and feelings and parts of the experience as much as they can, because nobody's kind of showing them how. But that's a part of what I do when I work with somebody, and that it is so important to help them so important to allow them to have a space to just be sad instead of trying to figure out some magical puzzle that they're never going to be able to figure out. And how, in my experience, when I help people with this specific thing, that a part of allowing them to have that space, allowing people to be sad when they've lost someone, instead of trying to figure out what should they do or what are all the other pieces, allowing somebody to have that space is just really important, and something that I think we all could think more about, just in terms of friends and family in general. The other thing I wanted to talk about is vulnerability. One of the things that we see demonstrated in this episode is a lot of really beautiful vulnerability, mostly from the teenagers to the adults, for lots of different reasons. So as a marriage and family therapist, one of the goals that I'm trying to help with couples and families, and siblings, is essentially to be vulnerable with each other.
Yep.
The couples dialogue, something that I've talked about in previous episodes. And the whole idea of the couples dialogue is that it breaks down the regular pattern of discussions or communication. Because what we want, so a part of the reason why couples dialogue breaks up those regular conversations that people have, is that it gives them a chance to be in the moment. It gives them a chance to be authentic. When I'm showing you a different way to communicate, that means you're not going to be able to have a whole spiel of what you normally say. And what I'm really hoping they'll do is be able to be vulnerable. People are not always ready for that. I get a lot of pushback about the couples dialogue and with couples for lots of different reasons about how
they hate it.
They're like, but this isn't solving a problem, though.
This isn't solving a problem. And why isn't getting it to the problem? And it's because that's not what we're doing here. We need to help you be vulnerable. Some of the barriers that people have is not feeling safe in terms of being able to be vulnerable. That's also something we've been talking about. Not being able to trust other people is both valid and unhelpful at the same time. There's a base level of trust that we can extend to others while keeping personal things safe. And I'm going to talk about that. I think that when we are all in some level of flight, fight, freeze, hide, or fawn, it can be impossible to trust other people. But we still want to be heard. We still want to be connected to other people. In order to connect, we must calm our central nervous system first. We have to calm it so we can decide how and what and how we want to communicate it. True connecting is trusting ourselves to be honest and thoughtful with our communication. Being vulnerable is not trusting other people as much as it is trusting ourselves. We can only control how we react to feelings and thoughts. Trusting that you can decreases the anxiety of the unknown, of what can happen. And so kind of what my essential point is that as much as we make vulnerability seem like it's that you have to be able to trust the people that you're with, it's more that you have to trust yourself to be honest and to be open and to give someone a chance. And that's something that is demonstrated very beautifully in the show.
And that in order to be truly vulnerable, you must be able to trust yourself that you have everything you need to recover from the moments where it gets really hard without breaking. that breaking down is not breaking permanently, that the hard moments are never as long as you think they are, that you can get through them, and you rightfully are afraid of them, but you don't need to avoid them.
The amount of times that I tell clients that we only need 10 seconds. We only need that 10 seconds of giving yourself the 10 seconds that you need before you communicate something that might be hard, or that it's 10 seconds of being uncomfortable. It doesn't take longer than that to say something that feels like we have to have everything in place in order to say it the right way, but that really it's only 10 or 15 seconds that we really have to be brave. In most experiences with people that I've worked with, once they have decided to be vulnerable with someone, that it often can go well. Not always, because sometimes we have a hard time choosing people that we want to start being vulnerable with.
Yeah, I tell people, like, a lot of times vulnerability begets more vulnerability. Everyone's waiting for someone to be vulnerable. And so that's why I said, like, with the Willie Jack speech, it'll be interesting what vulnerability becomes of that. I think also in the season 2 episode where Cheese is in the group home, you see he has a lot of vulnerability that then begets more vulnerability from the people he's around. And you're right in that it is, I tell clients, when we are vulnerable and when we communicate authentically, we're not in control of other people. They might really not take it well. And we, like exactly what you said, Hannah, we have to trust that we are doing the right thing and that was the right decision to be vulnerable. And that's really hard. And that if nothing else, we can sit in the fulfillment of knowing that we did our best. But it's really tough. We really want to have like a perfect scenario when we say something to others, especially if it's a really hard discussion. So with that, we will take one last break and then do final thoughts. All right, final thoughts. I'm curious. I want to know your final thoughts, Ben, for my own selfish reasons.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to start with, I can't begin to tell you how excited I was when the episode with Cheese and Big ended and they're talking about Batman. And how this would be like Batman, except that nobody's rich and nobody has any money and all that. I was like, wow, this is an episode where I didn't even have to creatively force.
That's true. I think I almost tried to tape it, like record that and send it to you, but I couldn't make it work.
But beyond that, I think that this show is excellent. It's an excellent immersion into a culture that it just takes you on the ride, which FX is really good at. It's going like, hey, you're coming into this culture. It doesn't matter whether you know anything about it. You're going to learn. And we're going to go about it from the point of view of people in the culture. And we're going to be unashamed and unabashed about that. And we will pull no punches. I do notice that whatever branding they've decided to do internally with FX, where they've gone fearless, I think it started with Sons of Anarchy, when they went like exactly the same model of, we're getting into a culture and we're going to go with everything from the standpoint of that culture, and we're going to show the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we're going right for the jugular. And this show built on that, although, you know, this has some of the Taika Waititi style ridiculousness to it, which I also enjoyed. Like the spirit, every time that dude was on the screen, I was laughing because he's so good. And he's he unabashedly is like, hey, I am Native American and we are going to go right for all of our cultural things, because that actor is actually a cultural guide. He works on helping people learn about their culture, and the yells and the way he phrases things is just amazing. And I think beyond all of those things that I think are really important with shows is that we establish that this is the world we're in and this is the standpoint of the people in that world, because those are the kinds of shows that are going to pull me in. Is I want to be immersed into whatever it is. I cannot stand shows that are like, hey, look at these people that are a hot mess that are just really beautiful, and we're going to watch them. Yeah, we're just going to do all this crazy shit. I can't stand it. My wife gets so mad at me when shows like that come on, and it's just like, this is the same bullshit of like, we're going to watch terrible people do terrible things for no reason, and I'm not here for it. She's been watching In the Dark, and that's pretty much exactly that. Like, it's just, no, I hate it. But all those kinds of things, this is none of that. Here's a real story about real people from real perspective. And what we're going to do is tell that story with heart, and we're going to confront the hard things, and we're going to help people see that there is a lot more to any story. And we're going to uncover it piece by piece, and we're going to look at how this central event shaped these people's lives. And they did it wonderfully. And they took care of mental health. They took care of culture. They took care of society. They covered all the angles that impact these people and made you feel it. And they did a great job. And I think it's great.
Good, great. I can go next. If you couldn't tell by the fact that I cried twice just talking about this show on this episode of the podcast, is I love this show. I think what you're saying, Ben, exactly, is it just drops you in to an experience, to a culture, and it doesn't really cater to white people. It's not trying to exposition dump constantly so that white people watching can feel comfortable. And I would say I think part of why I wanted to do this show on our podcast is because I want more people to watch it. And I think that I don't want people to be discouraged that they can't get into it because it's not anything they understand or they know anything about. It's really easy to drop into because it's very human. It's so much, the show's very heartwarming and wholesome and vulnerable and gut-wrenching, but in ways that are, the show, I think I can find it difficult to watch sometimes because it is emotional for me. And it's never it's not trauma porn or any of that stuff where it's unrelenting, look at these people over here who are suffering so much. And I think that says a lot about the fact that it is being supported by Taika Waititi, but it's not really his show. It's the creator, Sterling Harjo, is Native, and all the writers are, and all the actors are. And it's not like Twilight where Taylor Lautner is not a spec Native American. And even the actress who plays Elora, she actually is a writer now for the show, and she writes a lot of season 2. And so it really is a communal experience. And I think it's one of my favorite shows ever. And I hope everyone listening if you haven't watched it, that you're really encouraged to watch it, no matter where you come from, because we all have tragedies in our lives. We all have, people, if you go one generation up, no matter where you're from, nobody's talking about the hard stuff. Nobody's talking about mental health. No one's talking about secrets and sadness. And so I think there's so much to be taken from this show. And this show, as a therapist, it's on my top 10 in terms of as a therapist, what I would recommend other people watch. So that's my big old stamp. Hannah?
I love this show. It's really beautiful. And oftentimes when I'm crying, when I'm watching it, it feels hopeful and it feels genuine in a different way. And so I really enjoy this show, and I'm really excited to continue to watch the newest episodes that they come out with. But I think it's just something that's done really beautifully and in a very meaningful way. And that when you get a show like that, it's really hard to dismiss it. And that you really should try the first couple episodes. Also, what's really nice is it's 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. So we did all of season 1 because it really was about as long as Lord of the Rings, one movie. So that's the part of why we decided to do it. But I love the show. I love the characters. And I'm probably going to rewatch season 2 because I just rewatched season 1. Mm-hmm.
I know. I kind of want to watch season 2 again as well.
So for clarity, Hannah will watch it again.
Absolutely.
That is a rare stamp of approval, ladies and gentlemen.
That's on your bingo board. You got a bingo, babe.
Agreed.
All right.
Agreed.
Well, with that, 3 for 3, recommending this, we will end there. So as always, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology, on Twitter, for as long as Twitter lasts, at popcorn_psych.
Dumpster fire.
We are dating it, but it's, yeah. And you can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We have a Patreon. If you would like to support us any way you can, we are a self-run, ragtag group over here. And then also, if you wanted to buy any merch from us at TeePublic, you can find us there as well. Like always, we wish you all the best.
With you.
And also with you.
I guess I can put that out.